Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm sitting with David Nemarnik. He is the founder of Alloro Vineyard in the northern part of the Willamette Valley in Oregon. David, welcome, and tell us where we are in this beautiful property.
Thank you, Allison. It's great to be here. We're in the northern Willamette Valley. The AVA that Alloro is located in is the Chehalem Mountains AVA, and we're on a ridge called Laurel Ridge. It's kind of an eastern ridge of Chehalem Mountains. We're at about a 650 to 700 foot elevation at the top and about probably 500 feet at the bottom.
Oh, fantastic. So tell us the story of Alloro Vineyard. When did you get started and, the name?
Sure. Alloro, I guess it goes back to, this desire I had to start a winery going way back. And that came about, I was making homemade wine in my garage. And that all started about because we had a family business. And the family business was produce distribution. And I grew up in a produce family. It goes back a couple of generations, actually, as far as involvement in produce in our family. My father used to bring in wine grapes for the locals that made their homemade wine. And growing up in a family, we drank wine growing up because my mother's Italian. My father was born in what was then Italy. And so we had a culture of drinking wine at home. And so I was always interested in it. And cousins that made homemade wine, I thought, maybe I'll try making some homemade wine. And one year we had some extra grapes. I took them to my garage and bought the equipment, bought a book, and started making homemade wine. And, after a while, it wasn't bad. I thought, this isn't bad. Cabernet was my first wine I made. Then I moved into Zinfandel. I made some Pinot Noir, made some Riesling, just kind of experimenting in the garage. It was just kind of fun. Then eventually I made some late harvest Muscat in my garage. But
was that based up here in Oregon?
That was based up here in Oregon. Yeah, I lived in a townhouse in Portland, and before I moved out here to the farm. And so that was kind of my first experience of growing wine grapes or making wine was in my garage in the cellar. So that's kind of, so fast forward, this is back in the early 90s, and I've always had an interest in farming. I grew up in Portland, the city, up until about third grade. Then we moved out to the country. And I worked on the local farms. Back then kids picked berries and we bucked hay and cleaned out the neighbors' cow barns. And I always thought it was fascinating, the whole process of agriculture, planting a crop, harvesting in the fall. That whole rhythm to me was just some things resonate with you. And that resonated with me. So now I'm making homemade wine in my garage. And I'm thinking, I go out biking in the Chehalem Mountains, and there's some beautiful property I biked by. And so I thought, someday I'm going to buy some farmland. Well, then I got serious, and I got a hold of a realtor that specialized in vineyard land, and we drove up and down the Willamette Valley. Hadn't found the right site yet, and I remember telling his name was Mike McLean. I said, Mike, there's a piece of property I want you to take a look at. And it's this piece of property. It wasn't for sale, but I knew who the owner was, and I called him up. And over the phone, made him some offers, and finally, after 3 weeks, and my third offer, where he kept telling me he was going to save it for his grandkids, he finally said we had a deal. So I ended up buying this piece of ground. Of course, I had some caveats. First, I had to have some, conditions. I wanted to get the land tested to make sure it was a good site. It turned out to be a Class A site. And so I was able to purchase the ground, and I had this whole, I'm sure it's true with everybody, including yourself, because you're doing something you're passionate about. It was a kind of an epiphany. One moment, the light bulb went on. I go, this is just too cool. The idea of doing that and being able to grow my own wine grapes and make my own wine was just one of those epiphanies. You kind of go, this is just, it resonated.
So this property didn't have vines planted when you first came here?
It was just it had been planted in winter wheat and clover, kind of rotated over the years.
And so how many acres is this property?
This acres is a contiguous 110 acres. First, I had bought the first 40 acres back in 1999 and planted the first 20 acres of grapes. And then within a couple of years, planted more grapes. Now we're up to 34 acres. And then over the years, I've bought neighboring contiguous property. So we have 110 acres now.
110 acres with a total of 34 planted. And what are the grapes that you have planted here?
Primarily Pinot Noir. We do have 5 acres now of Chardonnay. We have an acre of Riesling, and I've got a half acre of Muscat.
And what is your total case production?
This year we'll produce about 3,400 cases. Last year we were just under 3,000.
And you're not sourcing fruit from anywhere else?
No, we're an estate property, which means all the fruit is grown on the property, the wine is made here on the property, and produced here on the property.
And where can people find your wines? Are they available outside of the tasting room?
Yes, they are. We are in 9 different states at this time. So there is some national presence. We're on the East Coast. We're down in Atlanta. We're in Texas. We're in Wisconsin, D.C. We're in Washington, Oregon. So not a lot of states, but given our production, that's really about all the more wine we have to share around the country.
Oh. So you were just talking about your childhood, and obviously wine has been a part of your life since you were very little. But do you remember one of your first memories relevant to wine?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I can't really say a first memory. I think, again, growing up in a kind of an Italian family, Italian grandmother who was over, it was always Sunday dinner at Grandma's house, and a mom who cooked and, very traditional. We always had, family meals together, and it always included wine. There was always wine on the table, always. And the wine my father used to get, if it was, I remember the family staple was, there was a small distribution company in Portland under the Ross Island Bridge. And you had to buy 12 cases to get it at wholesale. And it was like about $1.85 a gallon. I remember doing the math on how much we paid for that wine. But it was Cribari. And it was Cribari, I think, Vino di Familia or something, wine for the family. I remember the picture. It was a picture of Mr. Cribari, this old Italian guy, on the label, and that was the wine. It was basically jug wine. But,
of course.
And I remember we had to buy some Vin Rosé for my grandmother, which was a lighter, sweeter wine, and that was the family staple. So we didn't buy fine bottled wine. I didn't get exposed to that until much later in my life.
So when you got exposed to it, and obviously we're sitting here with some bottles of wine surrounding us that look from different producers, is there one memorable wine occasion you had and what that wine was?
I really can't pick one particular occasion out, but I do remember when I was and I'd gotten out of school, and it'd been a few years, out of school, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they started opening up tasting rooms in the Willamette Valley, and I go, we got a wine industry here. This is kind of cool. And I remember going with some friends to my first Oregon winery. Like, this is pretty neat. And I remember, wow, this is. I really wasn't expecting much, although I had read in the paper that Oregon was getting some press, but I didn't know what to expect. And I went, wow, this is really good. This is really good tasting wine. And not that I hadn't had, wines, better wines than the Cribari jug wine before then, but it was just kind of I remember that made a mental impression on me, like, wow, we can make good wines here. So that was those are early experiences that kind of, you lock in your mind and you kind of make a mental note.
Yeah. If we were to enter your wine cellar, wherever that may be, you don't have to tell us, but what would we find in there? What kind of wines and how broad a selection do you have?
I'm not a collector, and I'm really not a wine expert in the classical sense. It's just, I really enjoy farming grapes, and I enjoy making, really fine Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. But in my cellar, every other year, Alloro hosts a trip to Italy. And so we've done 3 trips now. Our first trip was to Tuscany. Piedmont was our second trip, and our third trip was to Sicily, the wine country of Sicily, southwestern Sicily specifically. So every time we go on those trips, it's really fun to visit producers and bring their wines home. And even before he'd made these Italian trips, I've always been very fond of Nebbiolo and Piedmont wines. And I love the Barolos and Barbarescos of Piedmont. They're just wonderful, complex and nuanced wines that I find just really, really desirable. And they're made in different styles, depending upon Barolo or Barbaresco and depending upon the producer. But by and large, it's a very interesting grape. I really liken Nebbiolo to kind of Pinot Noir in that it's a very difficult grape to grow. It's a difficult wine to make well. But when it's made well, it's amazing. So that's kind of if I was going to bring something home, and I only had one choice, that's what I would bring home.
Do you drink wine on a regular basis?
Oh, yes.
And what do you find that you're opening up recently?
Well, the warmer weather, of course, I love reds, but in the warmer weather, I like whites, and of course, I'm drinking Chardonnay. It's a wonderful wine. I particularly like Oregon Chardonnay, just because it's a lighter, more food-friendly style, if you will, versus some of the bigger, more full-bodied Chardonnays. It's kind of my own preference. I find it goes well with food. We make a dry Riesling, which my summer food pairing is Sheridan Fruits Bratwurst. It's a little market in southeast Portland, with Riesling. And on a bun with ghetto mustard, this yellow Heinz mustard, and a bratwurst and a Riesling. It's a killer pairing.
You're making me really hungry.
That Riesling and the fat of that bratwurst, it just goes really well.
We're going to revisit that one in a minute. I'm curious, you spend time in your vineyards. This is your property. This is your home. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
That's a very good question. I don't really think a perfect variety because everybody's palate's different. You might prefer big reds. I might like dry whites. I mean, I think every varietal can express itself. I think vinifera grapes that are produced commercially, there's obviously people that like them. And I think when they're really produced well and they express themselves really well, I think they all can be appreciated. It just depends on your palate.
Right. And as a small producer, getting the word out about your wines, and obviously people come in here and are introduced to it, but what's your opinion of wine critics and scores?
I think, very, very good question.
Especially because we're sitting here surrounded by every wine magazine possible. So you obviously read them.
I like the pictures. But anyway, I think that there's value added. I think that a lot of people consider the context. And I think in the context of a wine magazine, or a publication that's about wine, I think it offers valuable information. Is it perfect? Of course not. Because humans are involved. It's not perfect. But I think the process of scoring wines adds value to the marketplace. It does give people some guidance. And I think most sophisticated buyers are going to go, okay, that's probably a good general direction of where that winery is or where they're going or where their wines are. But I always say, taste. And people will come to the tasting room here and they'll say, well, what do you look for in a wine? Well, how do you know if a wine tastes good? I said, if it tastes good to you, it tastes good. And I always encourage people, even if you're in a 7-Eleven and they're pouring wine, try it. You may discover you don't like that wine, and over time you'll start to understand why you don't like it or why you do like it. So getting back to your question about the critics, I think they add value. Are they the panacea to making buying decisions? Of course not. But they add value to the marketplace, of course.
So as a wine consumer, assuming that you had everything in front of you, if you had to pick red, white, or rosé?
Well, red would be my primary choice because I just drink more red than anything else. So I'm just going to be honest. It's going to be red.
Fair enough. Still or sparkling?
That's a really good question. If it's going to be red, it's going to be still, of course.
So you were talking about your favorite pairing, the dry Riesling with the bratwurst, and which sounds amazing and maybe not something people would typically think of, although the fat with the acidity sounds perfect. So talking about food and wine pairing, how do you approach that? Are you looking for the classic rules? Are you looking to break the rules? No rules? Or are you looking to pair certain things, contrast?
I think that's a great question. I think I love to cook, and I'm not a professional chef, but I do love cooking. And when you have that interest, you always try and learn, you read, and you try new things. And I think food and wine pairings can be tricky sometimes, like artichokes or asparagus. It's really difficult to pair. But when I see an article about what you can pair with artichokes, I read it because, okay, I'm going to try, and I don't always agree. I try and I go, no, it still doesn't go. Mm-hmm. But that having been said, I don't think there's any hard, there are general rules. You don't want to drink a large, huge red with some fresh grilled spring Chinook salmon. You're going to waste the elegance of that fish with a wine that's going to overpower the flavors. Yet you're not going to want to drink a delicate, elegant Pinot Noir with a huge meat sauce with spicy meatballs. It's not going to complement. They aren't going to complement each other. So I think you look at kind of the style of the food and the style of the wine. And over time, it's like anything. You experiment and you decide what goes well for you. But there are some universal rules that kind of come into play.
Yeah. But I do like that idea of the contrast of the acidity and of the Riesling with the fatness of the meat.
Exactly. I really like acid in wine. Our style here, we go for a lot of natural acidity to balance the fruit because I think it goes so, because again, I think one of the things I really find wonderful about wine is that marriage of food and wine. When you find the right food with the right wine, And the acid in the wine really helps balance the fat. A lot of fat and texture in food is really what we tend to like. And so when you have that acid that marries up with the richness of the food, it really, like I say, a spring Chinook with that fat that you just put on a cedar plank for about 3 minutes, and the fat's oozing out of it with a Pinot Noir. It's like one of those, I think, elegant pairings that is just hard to beat. But it's the acid in that Pinot Noir and the fruit, along with the fat and the richness of that salmon, just make for a fantastic meal.
I think everyone's licking their lips.
Yeah,
I am. So, for somebody who hasn't had the pleasure to taste your wines, what are they missing out on by not having had Alloro Vineyard yet?
Well, I think, I'm very proud of our wines. I think that there's so many good Pinot Noirs made in the state. I think the collaborative culture of this area is unusual. There's so much help to be had. As a new wine grower in '99, I had so much help from some of the big boys in the area. You could call up and ask for advice, and they literally would come over, get in their pickup truck and come over, or their car, and see you. Or you could come over there and they'd show you something or explain something or give you advice. And over the years, there are industry events like the Steamboat wine tasting down on the Umpqua River, where winemakers get together and critique each other's wines for 3 days, and you park your ego at the door and you share and you learn and you bring your wines. I think that collaborative culture within the Willamette Valley, within Oregon at large, not just in Willamette Valley, I think has been really good for the industry. And I think it makes Oregon wines. I think we make Pinot Noir that really does express that purity of fruit and that sense of place. And that's really what we go for here at Alloro. We really go for a purity of fruit. We go for a sense of place. We try and capture the vintage, kind of a snapshot in time, really, that really expresses the varietal in a classic way.
Beautiful. So if space aliens were to land on your property right now, which of the wines that you make would you want to present to them?
Well, right now, if I was going to go to the cellar and pour a wine that I really enjoy, that's drinking well right now, I think they're, of course, I have no ugly children. They're all beautiful.
Of course.
But that had been said, the 13 Reservato right now is just drinking beautiful. But I'm not going to pour it for the Martians because I don't think their palate's going to appreciate it. So I might just give them some rosé.
Rosé of Pinot Noir?
Yes, exactly.
Current release?
Yeah.
That's always inviting too, because if they like it, they'll want to try other wines.
I'm not going to knock rosé. Rosé is wonderful. It's a wonderful summer wine. And I think it's a good entry-level wine for someone that hasn't drank a lot of wine. It's easy to like. It's light on the palate, doesn't have a lot of extraction or heavy tannin, so it's really quite enjoyable.
So you live on the property where the vineyards are, eat, breathe, and sleep the land, and you manage the vineyards yourself. So vintages, you've been here a while. Do you see more consistency year after year, or do you see more irregularity from vintage to vintage? How do you see vintage variation playing out here?
No, great question. We've had a series of warmer vintages, have played out the last 5 years, on average, warmer than when I first started in '99. Is that climate or is that weather? I'm not sure, but it definitely is something you deal with. But in a general sense, there's variation vintage to vintage. It really does vary. There's no playbook, if you will. What I do as a grower is when we try to, first of all, look and see what the prognosticators are saying about the upcoming weather. There are long-term forecasts. They look at jet streams and northern oscillations, all these things that are way above my head, but they come out and they say, here's what we expect for the season. So you listen to that, you get that information before the season starts. Then we look at bud break and see when we get bud break. We look at bloom, and we're looking at the accumulated heat units, and that's an effort to measure the amount of solar energy over a growing season from the beginning of the season to the end. We'll look at where we are, and you can get on a website and compare amount of heat units year over year to see where you are compared to the previous years, which is very helpful. And so what we do in the vineyard is we manage according to what we think is happening. I've noticed this last 5 or 6 years is that we're managing more for warmer vintages and cooler. Before, we were very aggressive in pulling leaves and dropping fruit early to make sure we got phenolic ripeness before we got to harvest. Now we're doing things to kind of slow things down a little, or to mitigate the little bit warmer climate we're getting. We're still in a cool climate zone, don't get me wrong, but relatively speaking, we're managing a little differently, and it does vary from year to year. This year we had a relatively cool July. it was relatively cool. Right now we're having relatively cool weather. We haven't had any huge heat spikes. I think we've had 2 or 3 days at 90 degrees, and last year we had like 19 by now.
Wow.
So last year was a very warm year. This year is kind of more typical Oregon. And so even though we in general are still managing for warmer years, how many leaves we pull, when do we drop fruit, how much fruit do we drop, how we manage the cover crop, all those things, it's an active process. And that's why I walk the property 3 times a week. I walk every block. And the reason I walk every block is unless you walk it and see what's going on block to block, you won't do the right things at the right time. I always think that making really great wine is all about growing really great grapes. And that doesn't happen passively. You have to be actively involved in bringing out, and of course you have to have a great site. It goes without saying.
Of course.
But it really is about doing the right things at the right time and doing them well.
Wine Soundtrack, the voice of American wine growers and makers.
Well, speaking about being active in the vineyard, is part of that activity talking to your vines? I mean, if you're walking it 3 times a week, do you talk to your vines? And if so, what do you say to them?
Well, unless I've had about 3 Negronis, no, I'm not talking to the vines, but I do a lot. I do my thinking when I walk to the vineyard. That's kind of my thinking time when I'm walking them down the rows and looking. And it's kind of a good way for me to kind of process what's going on and just do my thinking time, walking up and down the rows. It's really important. I do it by myself. And my dog walks along with me, but Magpie, she comes along. But that's kind of how I stay in touch with what's going on in the vineyard to make sure we're doing everything well.
So you were talking about all the things you're looking at in weather and climate that will be sort of your predictors, or that will help you kind of manage what the outcome of a harvest is going to be. Is there anything else that you look for, any signs that you look for, or is it really all based on nature?
I think, the weather, of course, is going to have a big impact. And when things happen, if we have a real early bud break and an early bloom, it's going to shift the ripening period, that last month of ripening, if you will, to a warmer part of the year with longer days. And so again, I'm going to manage things differently. If we have a later bloom, so my ripening period is going to shift to a later time of year when our days are shorter and typically cooler weather and cooler nights, I'm going to manage slightly differently. So it's there's a timing issue.
And do you and your team have any good luck rituals that you do at the beginning of harvest or during or after?
For the last, it's been, let me think here now, probably 13 years. I had a wonderful grower from California that's been buying Pinot Noir from Alloro, and we've been shipping grapes down to her, and she's made some beautiful Pinots. She also has her own property down in the Santa Rita Hills. And
I think I know who it is.
And every year she would come up, and that room back there is where she stays. Sometimes her husband comes with her, he is just a kick.
Is that Kathy Joseph?
It's Kathy Joseph from Phil Head Cellars, and Kathy is a dear friend. And it's always the mark of the beginning of harvest when Kathy comes up, and we have a dinner in the house, and Tom Fitzpatrick, our winemaker, comes over, and we have a nice communal meal with Kathy and kind of launch the season. Josh will come, our assistant winemaker, and sometimes David, our foreman, and whoever can make it. But we have this communal meal to start the season and open up some fun. She always brings wines with her, and so it's just a time to catch up and really just kind of celebrate the excitement of the anticipation of the harvest.
I love it. A visitor from another place comes to mark the beginning of harvest.
Yeah. And of course, she's usually well through her harvest by then. So she's kind of, and last year it was worked out well. She was done, in plenty of time before we harvested here. So that's been a ritual, and it's been really enjoyable.
So you said you grew up in your family business, produce and stuff. Is that something you knew you would always do, or what did you want to be when you were a little boy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, growing up in a family business, dinner time conversations are about business. And I remember going down, on the weekends, and I was probably 7-8 years old, and the rail cars back then came full of, products, and a lot of them were in wooden boxes back then. They were all nailed together, and nothing was handled with forklifts or pallet jacks. It was all hand stacked. And so my job was to hand stack the lugs of tomatoes, these wooden lugs of tomatoes. And the guys would come in there with smoking their cigars and with their clamp trucks, pick them up and wheel them out and line them up on the floor. And so growing up in that business, I thought, well, this would be a cool business to be in. So I actually thought, being in the produce business would be kind of a neat thing to get involved in. It was just kind of scene, but it was just, I guess, in my blood, if you will. I really liked the business, and I liked the way it changed. It was very directly tied to farming because there's a seasonality to the products that come in, and there's a long-term relationship with the farmers that bring the products in. In the summertime, all the local growers were bringing their crops in. And in the summertime, you work down there and you unload their little flatbed trucks with their lettuce or their cabbage or their apples or whatever it might be. And so there was a seasonality to it. And then in the fall, the citrus would start. And then, and the berries in the summertime. And all of those things made an impact on me. It's just kind of that exposure to that whole natural process of agricultural products.
So, as I've said before, obviously this is your life. I mean, you eat, breathe, and sleep the vineyard. You're living in it and everything. But what do you do in your free time? What do you do for fun? Other than walk the vineyard and enjoy the lawn.
And I have to say that's fun to me. But I've always been an outdoor guy, and I found this property biking through these hills originally. Mm-hmm. I used to get on my bike after work and make a loop and stop, drink my water bottle out in this hayfield, watch the sunset. I could get back to my home before it would set. This was my 20s.
Well, because realistically, we're very close to Portland from here.
We're only 45 minutes from downtown Portland, maybe on traffic, maybe an hour. So we're very close to downtown. So I could ride my bike, make a little loop, and get home. Now, I was living in a suburb of Portland, just not too far from here, about 10 miles from here. But that is kind of how I discovered the site here. And kind of, I forgot the question. You got to go back.
Oh, what you do in your free time?
Oh, my free time. Okay. So
I never have free time.
Yeah. What is that exactly? I think I enjoy being outdoors. I do a little bird hunting. I got a great Labrador Retriever that's just a wonderful companion, and I have some really good friends. And we have a place, a ranch that we hunt at over in Eastern Oregon. And it's just the whole process of getting together with your friends and with your dogs and having a nice breakfast and going out in the field all day long. And anything with the outdoors I really enjoy, whether it's hiking, I do a little bit of fishing, a little bit of hunting, but my time has been really pretty limited because this is a demanding business. And I'm still involved in the family distribution company. So I've kind of got a lot of little balls in the air, if you will.
And is the entire family involved in the business?
I work with my brother-in-law, who really does a lot of the heavy lifting at the distribution company. My sister, his wife, is also involved in the company. And now both of their children, who are young, bright people, and they have both come to work recently. And we're just delighted to have them there. They're both bright young people. And we've all recognized that every organization you need to bring in, I call it new blood, or you need to bring in young people with bright ideas and energy and all those things that keep you moving forward, because nothing stays static and you have to embrace change. You have to embrace one of our core values here at Alloro and at Pacific Coast Fruit, our family business, is constant improvement and innovation, and a strong emphasis on a culture of respect and integrity. Those are kind of our core values that help us move forward, and bringing young, bright people in, new people with new ideas. Those are all, I think, key parts of any organization moving forward, whether you're making wine or, selling widgets.
Are your kids involved in the business and in the wine, on the wine side, I should say?
I have one daughter, and she will be a junior at Oregon State University, and we'll wait and see what happens with her life. She has a wonderful palate, and she is a wonderful cook. She enjoys cooking, and she's a bright young lady. So, we'll see what happens. It's part of my evil plan, but I think your job is to expose your children to possibilities, and then they choose their own path. So,
great. So, if you're planning a romantic evening, what are the wines that you're going to open up for that evening? Well,
I've been drinking some Blanc de Blanc bubbles, which I really enjoy. It's a wonderful wine to start out. It's great with a meal, and which is a sparkling wine made out of Chardonnay, which is really, really nice. And I've been drinking a Ponzi Vineyard sparkling wine recently that I really like. It's a Blanc de Blanc. It's a recent release of theirs, and it's just a beautiful bottle of wine. So I don't know if I can say labels on the air, but that's what I'm drinking. That's what I'm drinking right now.
Well, and that can start out any great evening.
So I don't. Since I have a couple cases of that in my cellar, I'd probably grab a bottle of that. And then I'm really partial, like I mentioned, to Nebbiolo. And if I was going to segue into something, and if I was serving up some gnocchi and some braised short ribs, I'd probably open up possibly a Proudest Barbaresco or If I was going to go for a Barolo, I'd probably go for a Vietti.
Oh, God. Okay. We have to stop talking about food and wine. No, you can keep going. So you have a great ethos. You were talking about the company ethos. When it comes to advice, is there a piece of advice someone once gave you for anything that has carried you through, and what is it and who gave it to you?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. I think that all of us have our ways of being in the world, if you will. And I grew up with two. I was blessed. I picked really good parents. I was really smart. Picked great parents. And my parents were both wonderful. My dad, immigrated here and really came here with nothing and made a success of himself, kind of just through the old-fashioned way, just hard work, just did the right thing. Always, he set a really good example for all of us kids in the family about doing the right thing and how important your reputation is, how important your name is. All those things are just, those things, your parenting is really important. And the lessons your parents teach you, and through example, my parents are both just really, really hard workers. And they were just, I think that, and I noticed my grandmother too, my mother's mother, who spent a lot of time with us, they just don't give up. They just keep their heads down and they set their mind on something and they just go. They just stay positive and they go after it. And I think that natural positivity, or if that's even a word, but that natural kind of positive, optimistic view, I think, is something that I think been very helpful for me. I feel blessed every day I get up. I'm happy every day I get up. I feel really lucky the life I get to live. Don't take anything for granted. I enjoy it all. So I just feel really lucky. And I think having a positive, optimistic outlook and a determination, I think I was saying I was really lucky that I had that example growing up, and I think that affected me to a great degree. And
if you could offer advice to our listeners, share a little ditty with us.
Advice? Oh boy. You know what they say about advice? It's worth what you pay for it. But I just think that find a passion in life. Find something that really resonates with you, no matter what it is. I think find something you're passionate about, and then do it really well. And constantly learn, constantly want to improve, constantly challenge yourself to try new things. I think that's, I think all of us were given that advice probably somewhere along our lives, hopefully. And I think that's really a good way to live.
We just have to remember it.
Yes, exactly. Well said.
So looking back at your career in the wine industry, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements to date?
In the wine industry, my proudest achievements, well, we're still in business, so I feel good about that.
Fair enough.
I think I'm really, really proud of the team we built here at Alloro. I really do. We've got a wonderful winemaker, Tom, and Josh, his assistant. In our tasting room, we recently brought on a new, tasting room manager, or I guess we call him our DTC manager. So he oversees all things related to wines going to not just DTC, but also distribution. And he's a wonderful, wonderful guy with you meet this guy, you're going to love him. He's just a wonderful guy. So Eric joined our team about a little over a year ago. And then he's got a wonderful group. He works with Nancy and Alicia and Casey, and we have Alan. So we've got just a great group of people. And then David in the vineyard. David, my foreman, has worked with me for 22 years now. And then Donato, his assistant. These guys are great guys. They're just wonderful guys. And of course, I got to watch David's kids grow up, and they're like family. Mm-hmm. And so I've just got a great team here of people that really make it fun to go to work every day. And we do embrace a culture, a healthy culture, a collaborative culture that makes it fun to come to work, because that's important.
Yeah. I love that sentiment. So complete the sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
A meal without friends.
So another imaginary situation. Picture a restaurant, people sitting at a table, a bottle of your wine sitting on the table. Paparazzi come by, and through the window, they want to capture that person on film. And your bottle's in there. Who would you want to be drinking your wine?
Let's see. It's a really good question. You kind of threw a curve at me here. Let's see. Who would I want to see drinking that wine? I put my marketing hat on. I got to really be specific here. That's a great question. I would say, I'm not going to say that because that's political. Okay. All right. I'm going to have to, let's take a cut here for a second. me take a break here.
Yeah.
Okay, me think about that. I wasn't thinking about that one. Let's see.
And it can be, living, deceased, celebrity, non-celebrity.
All right, I got it. Okay, if I was walking by a window and I wanted to see somebody drinking my wine, I would like to see both of my great-grandfathers drinking that wine. And the reason I want that to happen, my father's father, who I never got to meet, he was kind of like the mayor of the little village in what was then Italy. And he was he was a pretty cool guy from what I've heard from my cousins and stuff. He was just really just one of those natural leaders that was just a cool guy. And my other great-grandfather was Salvatore. He came from Sicily. Again, a guy that came here with nothing. The people left Sicily because it was pretty bad situation back then. Came here with nothing and made a success of himself and his family. And he also, there's stories about him I heard about things he did to help people that was just kind of extraordinary. So two men I would love to meet because I've heard about them, never got to meet either one of them.
Well, somewhere they are sitting together having a bottle of your wine.
There we go.
So, another imaginary question. Sending you off to a deserted island, what 3 wines do you take with you? I mean, perhaps it's the same ones for your romantic evening, but I don't know.
It might be. It might involve those. Aside from a wonderful Nebbiolo or a sparkling wine, I think... Or an Alloro Pinot Noir, of course.
Of course.
I think also something maybe something on the sweet side, maybe a nice Sauterne or a port. I like both of those wines, so kind of something to have after dinner and something for thinking afterwards in conversation.
So one more game we're going to play is pairing wine with music. And you've been speaking about a couple different wines you like to drink, from the sparkling wine from your neighbors here to your own Pinot Noir to a dry Riesling to a big Barolo. I don't know if you want to give me specific pairings or if you want to kind of riff on that one.
Well, not being a music expert, my go-to music when I'm drinking wine and having a meal, specifically, I have a sound system called Sonos, and then you can go onto your iPhone, you go to Pandora, and one of the stations I found I really like is called Guitar Radio. And it's just acoustic guitar, and it is just wonderful background music when you're enjoying a glass of wine with friends and or having a meal. It just goes so well. It's just a nice background music to have.
For all types of music, wine.
Yeah, for all types of wine. It just goes really, really well. The only exception might be, and this is kind of maybe more of a tribute to my mother, and that would be if I'm having a big hearty meal and a big red, I might put on some opera music. My mom, when we were kids, would play opera music really loud in the house. She'd just crank it up. And so I'd probably go that just as a tribute to my mother.
You create a big night scenario.
Yes, exactly.
So, David, tell me something. Of the world of wine, where is one place that's at the top of your bucket list that you'd like to go explore?
Boy, there's so many places to go visit. There's so many wonderful wines being made around the world now. I mean, the quality of wine overall is just amazing. I do like Argentine Malbecs. And so I would, Mendoza and that wine growing area in South America would be interesting to visit. Huge wine producing country, of course, with a big wine tradition. I think that would be interesting. I've never been to Australia or New Zealand. So Tasmania or New Zealand might be, because again, the Pinot Noir they're making down there, and they're making some wonderful wines and Chardonnay. So that would be interesting. And of course, I love going to Europe. So Italy or Spain or France, there's so many places you could visit there. So there's too many places, not enough time.
Well, you're going to have to find some time, and hopefully our listeners will find some time to come on up here. So can you just remind everyone how they can find Alloro Vineyards and about visiting? Absolutely.
Again, we're just outside of Portland, a little less than an hour. Our website is allorovineyard.com. And again, we do most of our sales is DTC out of the winery. We do have a storefront on our website, so folks can access wines in that way, or come out and visit, or we are in a few states, and again, that's on our website. It'll show you where you can get those wines.
And the tasting room is open 7 days a week?
We're open 7 days a week, 11 to 5, yes.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So if you're just visiting Portland, you can take a quick trip out here in the middle of the day.
Yes, we're quite accessible. We're right kind of at the beginning of the wine country, so and we get a lot of wonderful visitors, particularly in the summertime. There's a wonderful resort down the road called the Allison, which is just in Newburgh. they're like 15 minutes away. And so there's other properties, bed and breakfasts, and all kinds of properties. When you get online and look for places to stay in wine country near Portland, there's a plethora of choices. So,
well, great. David, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack, and have a great afternoon. Grazie.
Prego.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.